So we're gonna hop back in on the residential purchase agreement today. We'll finish up the grid for sure. And then, like I said, we'll kind of walk you through the rest of it. It's not that hard to explain to your clients because it's all the legal jargon of everything that's in the grid, basically.
Okay.
So not that complicated. My goal with this, the intention was that I'd show you, hey, here's how you explain it to your client, but it's not that easy. I mean, it is, and it's not, because now it's all the grid. You really like walk them through all the stuff on there. I'm really just trying to find my mouse, so I'm lost it. There it is. All right. So we talked about all the contingencies. We got down to L8. We didn't talk about L8, the sale of buyer's property. So if your sale is contingent on the sale of a property by a buyer, then you would include that little box there, which means that, right, so if they're selling a property and the funds from that property are going to be used to purchase the property forward, and they can't qualify for both properties, right? So in some cases, they may be able to do a different loan, which would allow them to hold the one and purchase the other. They can still be selling the one property at the same time, but it may not be contingent, which puts them in a stronger position in this market. Or they could do like a bridge loan. There's lots of little options there that make it so you don't have to be contingent on the sale of a property. The scary thing there is that you could be holding 2 payments for a month or 2. The good news is it's still a hot market. So in most cases, you're not going to hold it very long. And if your buyer closes in mid-March, their first payment's not going to be until May 1st. So you still got a 45-day period, even if they wanted to wait to put their house on the market until they were out of it, where they could still sell their house before they had that first payment. So they don't have double payments. So just something to keep in mind there. But if it is contingent on the sale of the property, then you're going to check that little box there on L8. It's going to include the COP form as part of your file. Zip Forms is pretty smart. So anytime you check a box that references another form, it adds it to your file for you.
Isn't that the best?
Isn't that the best? You still have to go in there and input the information into that form, but at least it reminds you that you need it. M1, M2, M3, this is all the possession section of the unit of the contract. So you've got time of possession, seller occupied or vacant units, or tenant occupied units. So it defaults to 6 p.m. on the date. No, it doesn't. I'm a liar. It defaults now to upon notice of recordation, which could be 10 a.m. It could be 3 p.m. It could be 6 p.m. So that's what the default is now upon recording, which I do like, because then you don't have people occupying the house before it's actually theirs. So in some cases, like I usually write in 10 a.m. on my contract, but it's oftentimes that we don't get the confirmation recording until 3 o'clock.
Right.
And then they've already got keys. They could already be moving in. And there are random weird instances where something comes up. There was just a crow chasing a squirrel. Sorry. Squirrel. Sorry.
Oh my gosh, should we turn around?
Sorry. I did curtains. There are random instances where there have been properties that have fallen out of escrow on recording. Something comes up in the recording department when they're doing their one last check before they go to record. They find something new on there, or something happens. It has happened. So anyways,
You say fill in a time.
I don't say fill in a time. I used to do 10 a.m. So people would get keys before it actually recorded. So now the default is once it records, you get keys.
I'll leave it at that.
The thing there, but for sellers, is that now it becomes a fluid time. They really need to be out the day before.
Yes, they
Right.
do.
The sellers really need to be out the day before, because they don't know if we're going to get notice at 8 a.m., at 10 a.m., at 3 p.m. Like the seller needs to be out if they're not doing the rent back. Okay. So this is that here. If the TOPA is the tenant in possession form, is the TOPA, time of possession, right? So it's that's what you got there. Seller occupied or vacant units, right? So this is time of possession. We're always going to fill out a time of possession. And then, or we're always going to look at that box. It's separate from these other 2 boxes. So you're always going to choose generally like 2 boxes, right? We're going to think of this as 2 boxes. We're either going to have possession and seller occupied and vacant, or tenant, time of possession and tenant occupied, right? So it's going to fall. So time of possession is here. So this is notice of recordation, but if we're gonna give it, it defaults to close of escrow for seller occupied or vacant units. But if we're gonna give them a rent back, then we're gonna check one of these boxes, and then this time of possession no longer applies.
Right.
Okay, because we're gonna fill it in on the appropriate form. So if they're gonna stay less than 29 days, sellers are gonna stay less than 29 days or less. So it'd be less than 30 days, right?
Mhm.
29 days or less. We're gonna check this box here and we're gonna fill in how many days.
Mm.
Okay, we can't just check the box and be like, well, it says 29 there. No, sorry. You got to fill it in here. You're giving them 29 days, you're giving them 14 days, you're giving them 7 days. How many
Mhm.
days are you giving them after the close of escrow? Up to 29, up to and including. If it's that, we're going to include the SIP form.
Seller in possession.
SIP, seller in possession after the close
Oh,
of
it says
escrow.
it there.
Yep.
How many?
If they're going to stay 30 or more days, then we're
Mm.
going to check the second box and you're going to say how many days they're going to stay here. Now, keep in mind that if your buyer is getting financed, you need to check with the lender on what the lender is going to allow if the seller needs more than 29 days.
Oh, okay.
Most lenders will allow up to 60 days.
Mhm.
Some do not, so just double check.
Mm.
But if we start crossing into the 90, 120 day mark, we could have an issue because now the lender's going to go, it's not owner occupied. They want it to be owner occupied within a couple months.
Now, let me ask the question. If they do per se give you 60 days, that we're doing a seller in possession for 60 days, you know how you don't normally make your first payment until 45 days. Is that 45 days still in effect, even though the loan? Oh.
Yeah. So in today's market, oftentimes up to 29 days, you can usually get negotiated as free, right?
Mhm.
As the market begins to shift and change and buyers become more in control at some point, as I said before, at some point it's going to start shifting.
Mhm.
That's what our MCA says.
Mhm.
Then you're going to go back to, more often than not, the buyer's going to pay the PI, or the seller's going to pay the buyer's PITI, their principal, interest, taxes, and insurance
For that month that they're
for
there.
the days that they're there. You're going to
Uh-huh.
take their total payment, you're going to divide it by 30, and that would be the daily rate at
Oh,
which the seller
yeah,
would pay
okay.
to stay in the property.
Mhm.
And if we're gonna check this bottom box down here where we're staying longer than 29 days, at 29 days, it's usually not an issue. Seller moves out, everybody gets their funds appropriately. We move in, they make their payment. When it's beyond 30 days, we're talking about going 60 days or 45 days. The buyers may be in a position where they're gonna have to make their first payment before the sellers move out. And so we use a different form for that. It's called the RLAS, or the residential lease after the sale of the property.
Okay.
And we can talk about how those funds are going to be distributed and released to the buyer. So
Mhm.
usually we release them differently so that the buyer has those funds available in order to make their first payment or their
Mhm.
second payment, right?
Mhm.
So we release them a little differently. But anyways, you're going to put in how many days there. So we're either going to leave it at close of escrow. We're going to check a box for 29 days or less, or we're going to check the box for 30 days or more and then fill in the days.
Mhm. Okay, I have
Amy,
another question for you.
Oh.
So,
Give me a minute, Erica. Mila's going to
No.
ask and I'll go to you. I won't leave you.
Okay. So how would you handle this? So like my last client that I had, the seller stayed in place. We agreed for them to stay for 14 days, but they said they only needed 7. Then that 7 days went to 9, and then 9 went to 10. And so my buyers were getting a little frustrated. And I kind of felt like maybe I shouldn't even told them that they said that they would just take 7 days instead of the 14, because I felt like I got caught in the middle of that with them being frustrated with me because they kept extending it. And I tried to tell them, well, technically we agreed to the 14 days, but they were getting a little antsy.
Yeah.
But do you tell them like if they change the time frame or
So no,
no?
not
Okay.
until I know it's like a for sure done deal. Like, hey, sellers are packing up today. They're going to be gone by the end of
Yeah.
the day or tomorrow. Then I would tell them if they think they're going to be out earlier.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a little different where you've got like moving trucks involved,
Mhm.
right? And you're like, oh, we may need 29 days. And then they're like, oh, well, we got the moving truck scheduled on day 14.
Mhm.
But then I'd still be like, hey, moving trucks are scheduled for day 14. So chances are we're going to get in there pretty soon, but probably give them a couple days after the moving trucks come in case they stay and clean or do something else after. So
Mhm.
so don't plan on it. Moving
Mhm.
in on day 14, let's look at day 16,
Okay.
right? But that's only if like there's a hard fast, like I know there's moving trucks or
Mhm.
something scheduled to happen. Otherwise, we're just gonna let it sit out there and then be like, oh, guess what? They moved out earlier than anticipated,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Congrats, we can go get keys today.
Right,
What time do you
okay.
guys want to meet, right?
Okay.
So yeah, because that way you're not playing this
Juggling
yo-yo
that,
game.
And then also too, now, if you do have a seller in place, because I don't know if I did this right, but I made them give me a set of keys. Like, what,
So that's all specified in the SIP or the RLAS, of
Okay.
what's gonna happen with those keys and who gets a copy and where the
Okay.
deposit gets held and where the funds get held and when they get
Okay.
released. It's all part of that.
okay, okay.
So we'll cover that as
Okay,
well at some
okay.
point.
All right.
Erica, question.
So it was just about the PITI with the 29 days.
Yeah.
So, because the way that I was kind of with my last deal, the way I was kind of explained, like if they stay the 29 days, even though like my sellers, it was free. The buyers let them stay there for free because they did the 29 days. But I was told it's technically not really like the buyer, because they weren't paying their mortgage yet until like after the 45 days, it wasn't really free. But is the buyer still paying the PITI in those 29 days?
Yeah, so
Does
what
that make sense?
Yeah, so what happens with a buyer's mortgage is we close on the property on March 15th. And then they don't have their first payment until May 1st. And the reason they don't have their first payment until May 1st is they're gonna pay the interest for the month of March as part of their closing costs. So you'll see there's a prorated interest amount on their closing HUD form.
Mhm.
And that's for the month of March, to finish out the month of March, because we're
Mhm.
closing in the middle, okay? It doesn't matter whether they close on the 28th or the 15th or the 2nd, they're gonna pay the interest as part of their closing costs for the month that they close.
Mhm.
And then what happens is April comes around, and in April, your interest starts accruing on your loan. Day by day, you accrue a little bit of interest each day. And then on your May 1st payment, you're paying the interest that has accrued in April. You're paying the portion of the principal that's going to allow the mortgage to get paid off in 30 years. And you're paying your monthly amount of impounds, which is your taxes and insurance. So ultimately, the sellers stay. The reason we tell buyers that they won't have a double payment if we give them 29 days free,
Mhm.
right? The sellers get 29 days free. The buyers aren't going to have a double payment.
Hello?
because- hold on. Boom. All right. Is that they're going to, even though the interest is accruing, they'll be moved in before that first payment's due. So they won't be making a rent payment on wherever they're staying or whatever it is, right? So
Mhm.
that's why we say they don't have a double payment. They are in fact accruing interest, which is why generally, if it's not a seller's market and we don't have 27 offers on a property, why it's generally considered okay to charge sellers PITI to stay in the property, because the sellers understand that the buyers have a payment coming up.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have another question. When it comes to like HOAs, when they do the closing, are they charging them for the first year of HOA, or are they just, because you know how you have to incorporate
Yeah.
that in the price?
For most, they're just paying for the next month. So if we close again mid-March on a property that has an HOA, the seller's paying for their portion of the March HOA fees, the buyer's paying for their portion of the March HOA fees. It's usually a credit back to the seller because hopefully the seller's already paid March. And sometimes the lender will require you to pay the next month, April, in advance as part of the closing.
Mhm.
And then it goes back to generally the HOA fees are not paid as part of your mortgage. You get a
Right.
separate bill and then they start paying those. So it's usually a monthly. You pay maybe a month in advance at close. The only place that is different is if it's an annual HOA fee, like in Leisure Town.
Oh,
Right, so
okay.
Leisure Town's an annual HOA fee versus a monthly. It's like $800 a year. Some of them are 1,200 if you've got one that's in the double HOA period. And that will get paid for the full year at the close of escrow, the remainder.
Then why do they, like, for people who are looking for condos, why do the amount that they qualify adjust so significantly if they're not charging you for the first year?
Because the HOA fees are generally $400 to $500 a month,
Mhm.
which adjusts what a buyer qualifies for
Gotcha.
substantially, because it's adding, right? If they qualify for a $1,300 payment, based on 400,000. Now we've got to take that down to like 325, 350 to factor in that additional $400 payment that they're responsible
Okay,
for.
I got it now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so that's your possession section there. If it's tenant occupied, oh, we didn't cover tenant occupied. If it's tenant occupied, then we include Form TOPA, T-O-P-A, the tenant occupied property addendum.
Sounds good.
It's right there, actually.
Oh.
I came up with it all on my own and I could have cheated. And then.
I thought you were cheating. I was reading with you.
I was like, it's right there. All right, car form TOPA, and then tenant occupied, you're gonna check form TOPA or other attached. So 99% of the time, it's gonna be that TOPA form, the tenant occupied property addendum, which outlines what is gonna happen at the close of escrow, or how many days that tenant should be out prior to the close of escrow. So that'll outline those details.
What would be an other? I'm challenging you today.
I don't
sorry.
even know what other would
Oh,
be.
okay. Wow. Amy doesn't
There
know
shouldn't be,
something.
I
there's,
know, right?
I don't like that.
there shouldn't be an other.
Oh, okay.
Either the tenant's staying or the
Or the
tenant's not
agreement.
staying, or it should be spelled out on the TOPA. So if it's not on the TOPA, it would be somebody had like a separate written statement or
Oh,
something, like
okay.
see addendum to the TOPA or something.
Okay, what's the TOPA?
It's the tenant occupied property addendum. It
Oh, okay,
Yeah, it outlines
okay.
what's gonna happen to the tenant when the property closes, or how many days before the property closes, the tenant should be out.
I see. Thank you.
Oh, hold on. Hopefully she's still there. All right. All right.
Amy, I have one question.
Yes.
So you use the TOPA form whether the tenant is staying in the property or they're moving out. You use the same thing, but you just write on addendum the tenant is gonna move out before the COE. Yeah.
POE, yeah. So on the TOPA form, it specifies whether the tenant's gonna remain in possession after the close of escrow, whether they're going to vacate prior to the close of escrow. So you can specify that on the contract. And keep in mind too, that a tenant lease agreement supersedes the contract. So if the tenant has a contract in place for the next 6 months and we're closing in 30 days, that tenant has the right to stay in possession of that property. You cannot kick them out prior to the expiration of their agreement.
Got it. So if it's month to month, you can.
Yeah, if it's month to month, you can. And if it's month to month, you're looking at properties that are tenant occupied and you're thinking about putting an offer, just keep in mind, if they've been there a year or less, they get a
Uh-huh.
30-day notice. And if they've been there longer than a year, they get 60 days notice
Mm.
before they have to vacate.
I see. Got it.
You may
All
want to
right.
adjust your close of escrow accordingly if you don't want to become landlords.
Mm.
Oh,
All right. so
thank
that's-
you, Amy.
Section M is possession. N talks about the delivery of documents. This isn't super important to go over with buyers, this section here. It's important to us, but it's not really that important to them. It just outlines like how quick the seller's supposed to get us everything we need in order to complete our side of the transaction, which is the seller delivery of documents, sign and return the escrow holder provisions and instructions. There's actually one of these for the buyers, but we rarely ever actually return them to the title company. Time to pay fees for ordering HOA, installing smoke alarm, carbon monoxide detectors, and water heater bracing, and the evidence of representative authority. So the delivery of documents, right? That's all of our documents the seller is required to provide us with, the disclosures and everything.
Mhm.
Should be 7. Sometimes I shorten it up to 5. Like, hey, get us those because I'd really like to have them before I'm in there doing inspections, so that if
Mhm.
I see something on there that's a red flag, I can ask the inspector to look at it a little closer, right? That's my goal there.
Mhm.
The time to pay fees for ordering the HOA documents. This is the #1 thing that'll hold up a close of escrow, are these stupid HOA documents. The HOAs are getting better, but there are still some that are slow. So we just want to make sure that, hey, within 3 days of acceptance, that seller's got those things paid for and ordered. Installing smoke alarm, carbon monoxide detectors, and water heater bracing. Super important, right? So I shortened this one up to 3. Like, hey, this really should have been done before you went on the market. And if it
Mhm.
wasn't, let's get it done in the first 3 days, because I need it done before that appraiser comes through, so that I don't have to pay the appraiser to come back.
Mhm.
Because that's one of the things that all the appraisers are going to look for.
Right.
Amy, how soon do appraisals usually happen after the acceptance?
It all depends on the lender. Most lenders should have them ordered within 24 hours of acceptance. And sometimes the appraiser will be out there on day 3, and sometimes they'll be out there on day 13 and it's due on day 14.
Right.
So it's wise to have all of these done as soon as possible. So when
Absolutely.
I see.
Yeah.
Same with inspections or?
Inspections don't really matter so much. I mean, the inspections, as long as you, as the buyer, get them done within the contingency period. This stuff
Okay.
doesn't have to be done. The inspector will call it, but they don't have to go back to verify. You can just ask the seller to fix it.
And then what were you saying about you rather have these things installed when, was it when the appraiser comes or when the inspector comes?
Appraiser,
Oh, the appraiser. Okay.
the appraiser, because the appraiser is going to charge us like another $150 to come back out and take a picture of a carbon monoxide detector.
Oh, wow.
Need to get mine out of the fire.
Definitely have that done.
Out of the fireplace.
Thank you.
I know, this is.
Hey,
Amy?
Amy. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Just sorry, I'm backpedaling for a second, but why did you put 5 for seller delivery of documents?
Because
I missed
ultimately I
that.
want to try to get those SPQ, the property questionnaire and the transfer disclosure statement by the
Okay.
time I'm in there for inspection, so that if I see anything on there that's questionable, I can ask the inspector to take a double peek at it to make sure everything looks good.
Okay, thank you.
SPQ, TDS, and what was the other one? The seller questionnaire,
That's the
the
Seller,
SPQ,
yeah.
right? What was the other one? You mentioned 3.
I said SPQ, seller property questionnaire. I just decided I should
Oh.
probably not use the acronym and I should use both,
Oh,
because.
see, I didn't even know what the real terminology was. I needed that acronym.
Right?
All right, so that's, and then this evidence of representative authority, that's if anybody's being represented, right? If it's a corporation or a trust, that we have proof that they have the right to sign on behalf of that entity, and that goes for both buyers and sellers.
Amy, I have a question. N114A.
Okay,
So like, sometimes like, the seller, if they sell the property as it is, and they don't provide any disclosure, and how would you, I mean, do you put like anything in that, like the on N114A, do you put any number there, or you just leave it
yeah, so
as
there's,
it is?
so even if they're selling the property as is, there's still disclosures that are required by the state of California. So the SPQ and the TDS, that seller property questionnaire and transfer disclosure statement, the natural hazard zone disclosure, those are all required on just about 90% of 99% of properties that sell. There are a few that don't require, like if the property is in a trust and the original trustee is no longer living, it's gone to the creator of the trust is no longer living, and so now it's the trustees that never lived on the property. Then they still have documents they have to provide the buyers, but they're going to fill out an exempt seller disclosure instead of the seller property questionnaire and TDS. So there's always documents that have to get provided by the seller, no matter how they're trying to or attempting to sell the house. They still have to disclose.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. All right, so that section, not super important for buyers. We can just skip right over it. Right, okay. Unless you've got a buyer that's represented by an entity and they're being slow to like get you the trust documents or the LLC documents that show they have the right to sign on behalf, you can point out in 528 where you're like, hey, I need this within 3 days of acceptance. Like we need proof because I got to get it to the title company for the right that you have the right to sign on behalf of who we put on this contract.
Right.
Okay. Section P is, hey, what's included or excluded in the sale of the property? Bathroom mirror is always checked now because that should always be included. So if your seller has a really fancy mirror and they're like, that's a family heirloom, then tell them to change it out before you go on the market.
Right.
Okay. Stove is usually included in a sale in California. You do have to check the box. That's why on my template it's checked. There's never an instance where the stove isn't included in California. But the reason it's checked there is like your freestanding range, right? Some are built into the countertop,
Mhm.
but some slide into a spot, like 75% of stoves just slide into a hole in the counters. Those, they're technically like a refrigerator or a washer and dryer,
Right.
right? They're not attached property, so they could go. So that's why we check the box for stove. But that's the difference between like a stove and a range, right? Now it's all combined. Refrigerator, wine refrigerator, washers, dryers, dishwashers, microwaves. Your dishwasher in California is always included unless it's a portable dishwasher. Okay, if it's in the counters, you know, in the cabinets, it's built in, it's considered built in, check the box. Microwave, if it's attached, right? Most of them are attached, those stay with the property, but still check the box. Video doorbells, security camera equipment, security cameras, alarms, smart home devices, wall mounted brackets for video or audio equipment. That'd be like your TV mounts. Above ground pools, spas, bathroom mirrors, electric car charging systems and stations, and then potted trees and shrubs. So this is a good thing, right? Like we can see, hey, this is what's not buyer. These are what not going with the house. These are not going to come. Those potted plants that you really liked in the backyard, they're not going to come unless we check this box. This would be also, you can check a box and add additional items. This is where I might put something like shed in backyard. Most of the time the sheds are bolted to the ground. That's what keeps them from blowing away like in a tornado, right? We've been having tornadoes lately, not real ones, but just really gusty winds that flip a shed upside down. So most of them are bolted to the ground. But unless you actually verify that, put it in the writing. If there's cabinets and shelves and stuff in the garage and your buyer really wants those, even if you think they should stay, put them in the contract. Okay. If there's things mentioned in the MLS that, hey, this stuff's going to convey with the property, that doesn't count unless it's in our contract. So just because it's on a flyer or in the description or in the personal remarks, it's not going to stay unless we put it in the contract. And this is where you would do that.
But do you add in there? Because I always like if they have a chandelier that they're leaving, I put that in there too. Like, do you add additional things in there that sometimes I even put plantation shutters?
Plantation shutters are affixed to the property. Chandeliers are affixed to the property. They're considered fixtures. You can put them in there if you want to make sure they're going to stay. You don't have to. Usually when you put those in is under the excluded items, which is P2. If the seller has stated that the chandelier in the dining room is being taken, you would include it in the excluded items.
Okay.
Right. And the same thing goes for like in the description, if it says, hey, the seller is taking these items, it actually needs to be part of the contract and signed and agreed to by both parties. Otherwise, we didn't actually agree that the seller could take it, even though it said it in the MLS or said it on the flyer. They don't actually get to take it if it's not in here.
Amy, what about, would this kind of be the same on the other hand, if you want to make sure that the seller actually takes things, for example, the TV mount, stuff like that, like the buyer might not want those things there. So you want to make sure that they actually take them with them instead of leaving them and leaving the holes in the wall?
You don't have to, because it's already clarified, like, hey, we didn't check that box, it should have gone, right? So no, you don't have to, especially now with this new contract. With the old one, I would have said, yeah, you may want to mark it because it was so kind of vague with everything that stays or goes. This one's a lot more specific. And that being said, it never hurts to go ahead and fill it in on here on the excluded items. Like sometimes if there's a lot of trash on a property or something, or there's a shed that's fallen down in the backyard or like pretty dilapidated, like you might put, you know, here, we might write that in. Even though as part of the contract, the seller should take all personal belongings and remove debris, right? The house should be left swept, clean, free of debris and personal items. So any of the trash and anything should be removed. And sometimes it's okay to over clarify. Or sometimes it may be nice to be like, hey, additional items included, buyer will take property in whatever condition seller leaves it in. Multiple offer situation, like, hey, seller, you don't have to worry about getting rid of your trash. I'll take care of that for you. Right?
That would maybe be like a investor type property or something like that.
Investor, or if it was a hoarder's property and your seller,
Yeah.
your buyer was like, I really want this property. And yeah, I'm willing to get rid of the trash pile in the backyard. That's fine, whatever.
Where do you put that on the form?
You would put it, I probably wouldn't put it in additional items included. I'd put it down here in R and other terms.
Oh, okay.
But you could, I mean, you could put it here. I would just probably put it down on the bottom or on an addendum. Okay, so that's items included and excluded. It's okay to be specific. The next section is the allocation of costs. So this is the natural hazard zone disclosure report. In California, the seller is required to provide that. So we always check the box for seller. And I always check the box for environmental as well. And then anymore, I usually just check the box and put seller to choose here for who it's going to be provided by.
Is that pink?
Yeah. So seller to choose. Don't put seller's choice though, because seller's choice is an actual company, and then you're required to use that company or do an AEA to change the contract back to whoever the seller wants to go with. Okay. There's a couple additional reports here. Just remember, if we mention any reports here, the lender's going to want to see a copy of it.
Give me an example of what report.
If we put pest inspection and we want the seller to pay for it, or septic inspection and we want the seller to pay for it, this would not be a good place to put that.
Okay.
Because then the lender's going to be like, I need a copy of that, and it needs to be clean and clear, and everything needs to be remedied on that report. So we don't want to put anything in here we don't want the seller or the lender to have to look at. For the most part, your seller is going to pay for your smoke alarm, carbon monoxide detectors, and water heater bracing. It's a point of sale requirement by the state of California. Government required point of sale inspections or reports. I usually mark the box seller there. I've started marking that box on this new contract. I didn't like the one on the old one, but here I would put it. And that would be like in the East Bay where it may require a sewer lateral inspection, or in Woodland where they require a fire sprinkler suppression system inspection if there is one. That would be there. Government required point of sale corrective or remedial actions. I usually don't check anything here because if something were to come up on those, we could negotiate it into the contract. Because we don't know, as a seller, I'd be really hesitant to accept a contract if I don't have these reports done yet and I don't know what's going to come up on. In Davis, they have a point of sale inspection that the city does, and they go through the whole house, and anything that's not permitted or they don't think was permitted or done right or wasn't there when they bought the house, or they don't have record that it was there, they require them all to get like permitted and fixed and corrected. It's intense. That can become a really big ticket item, and as a seller, I wouldn't want to just blanket agree to it because we could be looking at like $20,000, which could kill the deal. But now as a seller, I'm locked into it if something's checked here.
Gotcha.
So that's why I don't check anything there. And in Vacaville, Solano County, for the most part, we don't have any point of sale requirements outside of the carbon monoxide, water heater, and smoke detectors. Escrow fees. This is, I think it was Mila that shared the document that said who paid, right? You can also go to like the Old Republic's website, just their free site. You don't even have to log in. You go to ortconline.com. On the left-hand side of the page, there's a little button, a link that says who pays. You click on that, you plug in the property, county, city, sale, purchase price, and it'll tell you if there's city transfer tax, county transfer tax, title and escrow, and who customarily pays those fees. So always pay attention and go there if you don't know for sure. And most of Solano County, the escrow and title is paid by the buyer right now. Don't ever check each to pay their own fees. There are no own fees in escrow. It's one escrow fee now. The buyer pays for their title insurance policy. The county transfer tax in Solano County is paid for by the seller. There is no city transfer tax in Solano County except for Vallejo. And don't ask me who pays in Vallejo. I think it's I don't know. I feel like it's the seller, but I could be wrong. I don't sell very many houses in Vallejo. I don't sell very many houses in Fairfield. Oh. I don't like to drive. Oh.
If it ain't country, it ain't nothing, country or bus.
Hey, Amy, question.
Yes.
So, for that county transfer tax fees, so it's typically the seller, but like right now that it's a seller's market, we would have like the upper hand if we put buyer on there.
You
buyer
would.
to pay for it.
You would.
Okay.
Absolutely. If you check the box both on any of these, it would be that they're going to be split equally. You don't even have to say both split 50-50. You can just check the box for both and then it's split. In a lot of like Sacramento in that area, title and escrow, there's some of those that are split 50-50. This I just explained to the buyer as, hey, here's what's customary, or as Maciel was saying, like if you wanted the upper hand, like, hey, it's customary for the seller to pay for the transfer tax, right? And if you wanted to make your offer a little bit better, you could pay the transfer tax. It doesn't amount to very much. In Solano County, it's $1.10 per thousand of the purchase price. So for like 500,000, it ends up being like $600. So it's not a huge cost, but it does just give you that little edge above somebody else. Right? Sellers look down their list and they're like, oh, I don't have to pay for anything. Great, perfect.
Right.
Let's go with that one. The HOA docs are already specified here that the seller is going to pay for the prep and disclosures. The buyer is going to pay for the certification fee that's usually required by their lender. And then the transfer fees, if there's any need to get specified here. And unless otherwise agreed to, the seller shall pay the separate HOA move out fee and the buyer should pay the separate move in fee, applies if separately billed or itemized with the cost and transfer fee. So I usually have the seller pay the transfer fees. That's me. And if you wanted the leg up, you could check it for buyer. Private transfer fees, we don't have very many properties that fall under private transfer fees. That would be like if it was in a private water district and there was a transfer fee to transfer names or something. I don't even know because I don't know that I've ever encountered a private transfer fee. Usually it falls within the HOAs. There's additional fees or costs here. We already had a place for closing costs up top, so this would just be additional fees or costs if you want to negotiate, pre-negotiate, like that the seller is going to pay for the cost of pest clearance, or maybe the buyer is going to pay for lender required repairs. Right? You could go lender required repairs. Lender required repairs. Oh, it maxes. So if the buyer was just going to blanket, you could go there. Or you could say CR. C section R. And then down here you could put buyer to pay lender required repairs up to $3,000. Right? So now you know the lender's going to cover that, or the buyer's going to cover that cost. So if you've got like a VA buyer or an FHA, you're afraid something might come up on the appraisal or in the pest inspection, then you could pre-negotiate that for buyer or seller. Okay.
So for your home warranty, your seller, you have the seller pay for that?
My default is for the seller to pay for it. I usually have the seller pay for it.
If you're the listing agent.
If I'm either one.
Oh,
I
okay.
usually prep them ahead of time that it's customary in Solano County to provide the home warranty. And not only that, but it's helpful because then if something happens as the buyers are moving in, that item's taken care of for the buyer and the buyer stays happy instead of them blaming the seller for giving them a defective property.
Oh, gotcha.
So
Okay.
it's usually in their best interest to pay for it because it keeps everybody happy longer. And I always write it in on our net sheets and stuff. So I always
Okay.
buffer for that.
You said you always pay for it?
No, I always have the
Someone else.
seller pay for it.
Oh, seller pay
I
for
always
it.
ask the seller to pay for it.
And cost not to exceed is always 540.
I usually, it depends on the property. So I usually I usually use First American Home Warranty and I actually go to their website and price it out per transaction. So their average cost for a single family residence is about 540. And that includes, I usually have seller's coverage in place during the escrow period. Because when you have seller's coverage in place and then buyer moves in and day one, the dishwasher stops working, the buyer can call it into the home warranty and it's covered instead of being a pre-existing condition. Or if something happens during the inspections and the dishwasher stops working during the inspections, and they're like, seller's like, I don't know, it was working. They can call it into the home warranty during the escrow period
Oh.
to get it fixed. So it helps keep those major costs down for unexpected items.
So
And
do
you-
we, oh, go ahead, Mila.
I was gonna say, and you cover that?
I have
Yes.
asked the seller to cover it.
So oh wow, you are a beast. So you have them cover while in escrow and cover for the first
Mhm.
year?
It's like $30 during escrow.
Yeah, I know. That's why I was asking, did
It's
you
like
pick it
nothing.
up? But I forget, you don't pick up anything.
I don't pick up anything.
Yeah.
I mean, if I have to, if the seller's not going to cover the home warranty, I never have the buyer pay for their own home warranty. I'll pay for it, hands down, but I usually negotiate it in.
Okay.
Okay.
So as far as selecting, like you said, you select First American, is that a discussion that you have with the buyer about like which one they want, or do you just kind of say First American?
I usually just fill it in. We don't even talk about it.
Okay, okay, thanks.
We've usually talked about the home warranty during the like showing of properties and
Mm.
stuff. So if I knew they had a company that they're like, oh yeah, we had a home warranty, we loved American Shield, or we love, then I would write it in. But if most of the time people have no idea who even home warranty companies are, and they just think it's cool that you offer it. So
Mhm.
I know the rep for First American Home Warranty. So if people have problems getting something covered, I can reach out to the rep and home warranties. It's all who you know, right? Like Lisa Visa does Fidelity. And so it's all in making sure you've got a contact, because the goal of the home warranty company is to tell them no. So you want to have somebody that's going to help you get to a yes.
Mm.
And then R is other terms. So this is where you put in, like that appraisal gap, lender, buyer to pay lender required repairs, any other random stuff that's going to help your offer get accepted can go into section R, or you could add an addendum to the offer as well, which gives you a lot more space. That would be the appropriate use of an addendum form versus an amendment.
Can you explain the difference between the amendment and the addendum form?
Yep, an addendum is where you're clarifying something. So before we have an accepted offer, if you're trying to clarify something with the contract, the buyer's qualifications, more details about the buyer's property that we're going to put on the market, why it's going to move quickly, what the features are, what the list price is, what your marketing plan is, like you're clarifying stuff, that's going to go on an addendum. Once you have a signed contract, any changes to that contract, whether it be, we wrote seller's choice in for the the natural hazard zone disclosure, and it should have been seller to choose. So now we have to change it because we actually use GCP or JCP instead of, I don't know, I said JCP instead of seller's choice. Now we have to do an amendment to the existing agreement to change the terms.
So that's an
AEA.
AEA, and the
Yep.
addendum is, what's the acronym for that?
AD.
Just an addendum.
AD.
A, what was the second letter?
D. As in dog, AD, like addendum.
Okay.
So addendum clarifies and a amendment changes. So if you're gonna change the contract and offer a credit to the buyer, that's a change to the contract. So it'd be an amendment to the existing agreement. Anytime there's a change, it goes on amendment.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy.
Yep. People use these wrong all the time, and it's okay to ask the other agent to put it on the correct form. All the time. An
It's okay to ask the
what's that? I've
other
never even
agent
heard of
for what?
that.
It's okay to ask the other agent for what, Amy?
If the other agent sends you over an addendum that should have been an amendment, it's okay to ask them to use the right form and resend it over.
Okay, awesome.
Basically, if
important.
it's something that may need to get accepted or rejected, it should be on an amendment because it gives you a place to actually reject it. Price change, right? The appraisal came in lower. Now we're clarifying what the final sales price is. AEA form. Because we're amending the existing agreement.
Amy,
Yes.
I have one question. So if you decide to provide your buyer the home warranty plan, which box do you
Yeah.
check?
I would check buyer, and then I would put like down here on R, I would put buyer's agent to cover cost of home warranty.
So, I mean, do you do like, any further action, like, so they can deduct from your commission when close of escrow?
Yeah, so this being right here gives the right for you to pay it to all parties. It's been announced to all parties that you're paying something on behalf of the buyer. And then when you go to do your commission demand, you'll do it as a debit to your commission.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Deduction.
All right.
This is
Thank
the
you.
deduction. How it's listed.
You can add it in afterwards though,
You
right?
can, absolutely. So you can add it in after You could leave it as buyer. You can come back and be like, oh, I'm going to cover it. You'll just need to do an amendment just stating that you're going to cover the cost of the home warranty on an AEA form.
Mhm.
All right, got it. Thank you.
Next section here, section 4, is just all the addendums and attachments that you can include with the purchase. So again, this section I don't go over a whole lot with my buyers unless maybe we have country property, because then there's the septic well and property monument propane addendum. I don't usually check this box though when I include it, because then if I check this box, now my lender wants to see that form, and I don't want my lender to look at that form because I don't want them to see that we actually did a septic and a well inspection and who paid for it.
Mhm.
So we just leave it out of the purchase contract.
Less is better, huh?
Less is better. If it was a manufactured home, a probate, tenant occupied property, TOPA, tenant in common purchase. We don't have very many of those, or stock cooperatives in this area. You see them down in the Bay Area every once in a while. If you're including an addendum with the offer, you would put it there. If it was a short sale, court confirmation, right? So all these things can be included. And all of them I would actually check except for the septic one. Okay, trust advisory if the house is in a trust, REO advisory if it was a bank-owned property, short sale, probate. So there's those advisories as well. The
Amy?
rest, yeah,
Amy, back up. The wildfire and the statewide buyer and seller advisory.
Yeah.
Why do you have those checked?
I always include the statewide buyer and seller advisory with my offer, which we'll go over this next week of what forms I include with my offers and my listing agreements. But the SBSA,
Oh, that would be
I always-
awesome.
yeah, but my SBSA, I always include because it talks about the seller's responsibilities and the buyer's responsibilities and the agent responsibilities and the different types of inspections that a buyer can have on the property. So I think that's one that's important for them to have upfront at time of offer, along with like the market conditions advisory. And I include the wildfire disaster advisory as well with most of my offers. Because
we're in that type of an area.
and it's not the
Okay.
fire hardening one, it's just the wildfire. Like, hey, make sure you investigate insurance in the area in which you're buying. There could be wildfires.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Yep. The rest of this, I don't go through a whole lot of it with my buyers. You know, the deposit, we already talked about the deposit up here. Like, hey, that's going to be due within 3 days of an accepted offer. It needs to come from an account that your lender knows about. Do you have 5,000? It's usually 1%, right? So I've already covered that. So I don't need to reiterate it when I hit section 4 or 5 here, which is the deposit, all cash loans. We've already talked about this. Additional financing terms, right? It's just stating that the buyer is responsible for trying to complete the purchase transaction with the financing as specified that we did to the seller. We can change financing types. It's okay to do that, but we just need to let the seller know, right? So most of this, again, I don't go over. Condition of the property on closing. This is an important section, this section 7, that the property is going to be left in its as in present condition, right? And it's going to be at time of possession, it should be free of debris, personal belongings, and swept clean. It's not going to be professionally cleaned.
Right.
Right? They don't have to. Vacuum sweep it, that's it. Wipe out the cabinets. They don't gotta wipe it all down and make it all shiny and pretty.
Right.
So it's a good idea to let your buyers know that. Seller remaining in possession after the close of escrow, we've already talked about this because it was up in the grid, right? Contingencies, removal of contingencies. Again, this, we already covered this, so I'm not gonna go through. And I'm gonna let the buyers know that, like, hey, the rest of the like, here's all the really important stuff in the contract. The rest of this is just gonna be your definitions and like more elaborated in writing of what we already covered when we talked about these terms and features. You know, condominium plan, the buyer's review of leased and lien. So all this is all up there in the contingency period. The allocation of costs, who's going to pay for what, reinspection fees, it's all in this contract. It's not necessary to go over with your buyers. If you've got a highly analytical one, this is why you'd want to sit down and have a buyer consultation appointment with them so that you can hand them a blank copy of this purchase agreement and they can read through it before we even write an offer. So they know what's in here. If they've got questions, they can ask, right? Because this is just, it's all the stuff that we already covered. Fire hardening, defensible space, termination of rights. We've talked about, we've already talked about the fact they should do investigation of the property. In my buyer presentation, I explained to them that, hey, you're gonna have inspections on the property. They're all optional. You can choose which ones you want. I do recommend that you go stalk your property, go sit out front in the neighborhood, different times of the day, different days of the week, take some food over there, enjoy hanging out for like 30 minutes, walk down the street, know what the neighbors look like, know what's going on in the neighborhood, make sure it's an area that you want to live in. Right?
Kind of skipping ahead here, but for the liquidated damages, typically, I mean, customarily, that's always signed, correct? Initialed.
So yeah, so it's always optional. I do think it's a good idea, especially as a buyer, because it limits the amount the seller can come after you for.
Okay,
As a seller, I think it's good because it predetermines what you can go after the buyer for, so you don't have to fight over how much you're gonna take from them if they're in breach. So yeah, generally speaking.
okay. My follow-up question to that is, it seems like the sellers prefer it to be initialed. Is that correct? By the buyer?
Sellers usually do, most sellers usually do, again, because it predetermines what the seller gets if they're in breach of contract.
And then if a buyer is like reluctant to initialing it, like how would you go about dialoguing that to explain what it's about? For example, like the buyer I had, he's new to this. So he kind of read it and said, whoa, what? They're going to come after my money. And like, how would you dialogue it so that it's presented in a way that is not scary to the
Yeah,
buyer?
so absolutely. So when I talk about, because this is one of the sections that I would talk about, the liquidated damages clause, and how I explain it to buyers is by initialing here, this limits the amount that the seller can keep in the instance that we are in breach of contract. Right? So in the instance that we've removed all of our contingencies and then you decide to cancel, then this limits the seller coming after you for either the actual deposit or 3%, whichever's less, right? So if our deposit is 1% of 600,000, you got $6,000, that's all they can keep of your money. They can't go after more. And that's what it limits it to. Now, my job as your agent is to protect your deposit, right? We're going to make sure that we're ready to remove contingencies before we actually remove them in writing, and that you're ready to move forward and that you want to purchase this property, right? My job is to protect your deposit. And just because we reach the end of those contingency periods we talked about before, doesn't mean they're removed. We actually have to remove them in writing. So until you're really truly ready to remove those contingencies, we won't remove them until you're confident that this is the house you want to move forward with. And we're confident that your loan's going to get approved. And we know what the appraisal came in at. And they're going to be like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Thank you. That's good. Yeah, thanks.
Arbitration of disputes, the next big box, the next big scary box. Number one, all transactions have to go through mediation. Arbitration, the way that gets explained is, hey, this is also optional, but what happens if there was a dispute that arose in this transaction? We went to mediation, we didn't resolve that dispute. Then if we initial the arbitration box, what happens is it basically goes to a court of people who understand real estate transactions and real estate law. It goes to a court where you have a jury of real estate agents that understand this. And they're going to help decide the outcome versus going to a regular court of law where it's just a random jury of people that don't understand real estate transactions. So that's how I explain that. And that's also optional. The stuff before that is really just definitions. Again, it's stuff that I don't really cover because it's already been covered as part of the grid. So that's kind of your contract. The last section is the expiration of offer here, which we already determined up there what in the grid when it was going to expire. You would check the box here if it was an entity buyer. So if it was a trust or an LLC, you'd fill out that. Buyers sign there. If you have more than two, you would check that box and use an ASA form, which is a whole nother topic. And if, let's see, that's all we got there. And then the sellers down here sign and they let you know whether they either counter offer, a backup offer, or their entities as well.
this is a new one too, I think. What is the designated electronic?
Yeah, so this, so now what happens is when I send this offer over to the seller's agent, the seller signs it and they accept it and send it back to me. We want to make sure we specify an electronic delivery email address or the email address at which we want them, where do we want them sending official documents back and forth to,
Oh, okay.
right? Because as soon as they send it to this email, it's now considered delivered, whether we've received it or not. So we want to make sure we know where we're looking for that.
Oh, okay.
If we don't sign a designated electronic delivery, then they actually have to deliver it in person.
Okay. I don't think I put my email there.
So put in an email there. I
Okay.
usually don't put in a text number
Mm-hmm.
and I usually don't put in an alternate. I just put in the
An
email,
email,
although
okay.
it may be good to. Shall we made to, no.
Okay.
If you had like a transaction coordinator that was reviewing everything or an
Mhm.
assistant, you could put in an alternate one as well.
Okay.
So that's that section there. It is important to fill that out so that
Okay.
we have where that's gonna go to.
So should I edit that since I already submitted my contract?
You could do an AEA to clarify that the electronic delivery address is X.
Oh, let me put that on this list here.
Title and escrow, we don't fill out. They'll fill that out once they get the offer. There you go. It's 11:05. Any questions on any of this? I think I actually have an appointment.
Can you scroll back to section A so I can look at it, make sure I got everything I need, please?
Okay.
Or if you want to email it to me. Oh, sorry. Hey,
I will,
Knock it out.
I'll download a copy of this and I'll throw it in,
my mailbox.
or I'll email it to you. And I'll also put it into the PC Peeps folder.
You're the bestest of the whole wide
Okay.
world.
All right.
Thank you, Amy.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.